This episode of the WAN Manager podcast is brought to you by the WAN Summit. The WAN Summit brings together buyers and providers of enterprise WAN services to identify and discuss trends in international network planning, procurement, and design. The WAN Summits cover all of the challenges, trends, and toolkits a WAN manager needs to do their job. And they're built around learning and networking. You can expect enterprise-only sessions, focused discussion groups, and no-pressure consultations between network managers and solution providers. You can join the WAN Summit in New York City on June 21st. Visit wansummit.com for more.
Welcome to another episode of the WAN Manager podcast. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and this is the show where we talk to networking experts about the data services that make business possible. So one of the developments in the WAN space we've been watching closely, both at Telegeography and on the show, of course, is network as a service and how it's emerging kind of both as specific products or solutions from vendors and how it integrates with existing WAN strategies from the enterprise IT infrastructure side. So there's, as usual, a lot to cut through in terms of how vendors present their services to the market and what folks on the end user side can actually adopt right now and what specific problems they're solving with those solutions. So I thought to help us break all of that down, I would invite back onto the show Jason Gintert, who is the CTO and co-founder of WAN Dynamics. And like I said, perhaps most importantly, a former guest of the WAN Manager podcast. So welcome back to the show, Jason.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be back.
Yeah. All right. So even though you've been on here before, maybe you could give listeners who might not have caught that episode just a brief rundown of what you do over at WAN Dynamics.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So WAN Dynamics, we advise organizations on how to adopt modern multi-cloud connectivity models. So, usually we're leveraging SD-WAN, SASE, SSE, which is, kind of the new term that's come out as you just stripped down version of SASE, and network as a service. And we do that with our managed and professional network service offerings. And I'm the co-founder and CTO of WAN Dynamics.
Gotcha. So you're properly sort of an MSP, not just offering kind of consulting services on what to choose. Is that right?
Right. We have a little bit of both. I mean, there are some organizations that just want an assessment of what they have and some advisement on which direction they should go and want to do that themselves. But most of our customers, we're providing a managed service offering for them. Yes.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right. Well, thanks for joining us again. So as I said, we're going to talk about network as a service. And one thing I have to get out straight away, since last time we talked about SASE. I was kind of thinking if we can call Secure Access Service Edge SASE, should we be calling network as a service something like nasty or something like that?
I'm all for it. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's see if we can make that happen right now.
Okay.
Maybe not, but anyway. So we've talked a fair bit about network as a service on the show. We've had on Dave Ward, who's the CEO of Packet Fabric. I think most folks that would be listening to something called the WAN Manager podcast have a pretty fair idea of what network as a service is. Nevertheless, I always think it's useful to kind of lay out definitions at the start of the show so that we can sort of all be on the same page of what we're talking about. So Jason, as the CTO of an MSP, what is network as a service to you?
So to me, network as a service is a cloud-based composable network architecture that allows you to stitch different enterprise network components, in a self-service and automated way. So, with NaaS, or nasty, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. There you go.
What
You're catching on
yeah,
already. So
there you go.
yeah.
Already integrating it. With NaaS, one's able to bring together multi-cloud SD-WAN, remote user connectivity, data center, and on-prem networks to create, a connectivity hub that an organization can manage to bring all the disparate pieces together.
Hmm.
And there's also, a lot in the way of capabilities with many of these platforms to integrate security with that. So, as you're tying these different pieces, into that hub to be able to inspect and filter traffic before it kind of crosses those perimeters. So as it comes in
Right.
from SD-WAN, as it comes in from your remote users, and it goes out to the data center or other cloud infrastructure, it allows you to securely segment that and gives you visibility. So there's a
Hmm.
lot of capabilities. We're talking about an SDN platform, a software defined networking platform, typically with one of these solutions. So there's many different software components usually under the hood that help you more easily manage it and gives you more visibility to exactly what's happening between all those networks.
Hmm. So management and visibility in sort of the core of the network, as opposed to the edge of the network where SD-WAN is sort of taking over. Does that work with your definition? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
So since you mentioned this, it kind of brings me to my next question anyway. With SDN. So way back in the day, at first we thought, oh, maybe SDN is something that we should be talking about at things like the WAN Summit and whatnot. Really ended up being more of carrier technology then. And so I wonder if you could maybe take us through a little bit of the underlying components of nasty, right? And how, from a technological standpoint, right, they came together to sort of make this new service. Because, like I said, it seems to me one of the promises of SDN from when we first were talking about it, whatever, maybe even a decade ago. I mean, it's a little long, but close to that, right? Now available for actual enterprise services. Does that comport with sort of how you see it developing as a service?
Yeah, to some degree, definitely. So I kind of see it in the same way that um, SD-WAN was a compilation of many technologies we'd had around for a long
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
just
Right.
repackaged in a new way.
Right.
And
It's IPsec and yeah, essentially, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I think NASA is very similar in that it's a lot of things we've had around for a long time, just in a new in a new presentation.
Hmm.
So, and the biggest drivers of it, for sure, are cloud adoption, the desire for
Hmm.
organizations to manage their network infrastructure in an automated and self service way. So, leveraging those SDN components, that being able to present to users a way to provision their own services,
Hmm.
monitor them, have the visibility that we were talking about, and be able to, work with them much the same way that they had with compute and storage. That's been in the public cloud for years.
Right.
The self-service way that they've been able to work with those things. I think that that's really what NaaS brings to the table.
Hmm.
And to your point, it's you know in a lot of the early SDN solutions, it was like, a solution looking for a problem. And
Right.
now it's taken a while for things to mature to the point where, okay, now we can take those architectures we started with and start to apply them to solving some of these real world problems, which, definitely, the last few
Hmm.
years, with public cloud adoption and how rapidly we've been kind of forced to move to the public cloud with things like COVID and work from home, and being going to school from home, and all of the things that have ushered in that this public cloud era. The network
Right.
had to catch up. So I think that
Hmm.
that's a huge driver for why we are where we are with NaaS.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that when so again years ago thinking about what's the sort of like you said the solution looking for the problem and bandwidth on demand, that sounded really cool. When you're in an end-to-end MPLS network, bandwidth on demand ends up not making a whole lot of sense, right? It's especially your bandwidth on demand at the edge, right, is something that seems really hard to put into practice in the long run. But here, because we've put all of this traffic into different shapes and patterns in the core network because of cloud adoption, suddenly that becomes something that's a lot more doable and makes a lot more sense from the enterprise demand side. I think that makes a lot of sense. So having said that, I think one of the things we're always trying to nail down, again, kind of both on the show and what we do at Telegeography in kind of researching all of this, is what does that mean for an actual customer who's out there saying, okay, I have some issues with my cloud connectivity, or it's expensive or whatever. What is actually out there in terms of network as a service products that someone could go buy today, and how do you see customers going about sort of adopting that in the present market?
Yeah, I'll use some examples of some specific products that we've seen
Hmm.
in the market that some of our customers consume. Um, that's a good example is Aviatrix. It's pretty popular as a way to really roll your own solution. So the way that their model
Hmm.
works is you host their transit gateways inside of your infrastructure. So you're really licensing their product to build into your own cloud, and
Hmm.
then they give you the dashboards and visibility that you need to one manage your your routing in your WAN and figure out how the traffic flows and all of your elements, how your data is getting from point A to point B. Um,
Hmm.
you get to manage that yourselves and to see all of that in their dashboard. Alkira is another one. They're a little bit different in that you host it on their stuff.
Hmm.
But some of the cool things that they do is they have a number of uh, VNF hosting and integration capabilities. So you can bring your own SD-WAN solution and just host it right inside their environment. You can bring your own virtual firewalls and host it in there.
Hmm.
So that gives you a way to kind of compose your own environment, build your own cloud, and the footprint really, for in Alkira's case and potentially in Aviatrix's case, it follows the footprint of the public cloud providers. So wherever
Hmm.
the AWSs, the GCPs, the Azures of the world have a cloud presence. So say US East 1, US East 2,
Hmm.
US Central, where those public clouds live, you're able to spin up this virtual infrastructure without having anything of your own there.
Hmm.
So a way for you to tie in that SD-WAN, remote users, to host your own virtual firewalls dedicated to you. Not in a shared multi-tenant way,
Right.
but you basically are building out your own fabric inside of there. And speaking of
Hmm.
fabric, Packet Fabric, who you
Right.
had Dave Ward on at one point, they're another good example. Equinix and Megaport have some offerings as well, and they're all kind of. It seems they all have slightly different flavors to them,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I see them as all kind of just like, again, to bring up the example of the maturing of the SD-WAN market and how that kind of came together, and then there became kind of table stake features for all of the
Right.
SD-WAN platforms after
Right.
a while. They all started out very different, but started to look a lot more similar
Hmm.
you know towards modern day. I think the same is true for a lot of these
Right.
providers. They're all going to kind of coalesce on a common set of features
Hmm.
and functionality, and they're going to have some of those NFV capabilities. They're all going to have the cloud integration capabilities,
Right.
and though they'll all each have kind of a a different foundation, they'll have similar functionality long term, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess to that point, perhaps there is a slight difference in the sense of all SD WAN ultimately is an over the top service, whereas there is some difference here, right? That like sort of Packet Fabric, for example, they have POPs, they provision wavelengths, whereas there's some pure over the top players here, right? So that are essentially selling a software kind of solution, even if there's instances in but it's ultimately they're not all of these providers, even that you mentioned, are actually provisioning their own transport services, right? So
That's true. Yeah, so some are leveraging the cloud backbones to get from
mhm.
point A to point B, and some are building out, like like you said, Packet
Yeah,
Fabric, Equinix, Megaport. They're all like building out real POPs and real network
right.
physical switches that you need to plug into at their data centers to get an NNI to tie into the network. Um,
Basically carriers who didn't have the sort of baggage of the legacy technologies, and right, so they can just
yeah,
move directly into this, right? So
that's right. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. Well, okay. So speaking of carriers, then, how do you think they fit in? If I recall your sort of background, you did used to work at a carrier a while back, right? So,
I did.
do you think carriers are going to try to compete in this space, or how are they going to respond to this? Because ultimately, it is kind of going to eat away. You know, in one sense, it was cloud and SD-WAN that really started eating away in the MPLS business. But this is still potentially, competing for some of the layer three, or even more MPLS business that carriers have right now. How do you think that they're responding, or what do you see happening there?
I think that the carriers do see the writings on the wall, and that this is
Hmm.
how um, clients are going to want to consume their
Right.
network moving forward. But
Hmm.
I also think they have an interesting challenge ahead of them, in that there's a lot of legacy infrastructure and systems that are going to have to be upgraded or
Right.
improved to be able to realize this level of agility. So
Hmm.
I think probably a good first step for many carriers out there, if I was to be consulting with them, talking to them about a good way to dip your toe in to figure out how all this works. It might be to partner with some of these companies for now to
Hmm. Hmm.
establish NNIs with some of these different network as a service providers, and be able to and stitch things together with APIs, so that they could potentially
Hmm.
have a marketplace of connectivity that they could present to their customers with a portal, and then it could be able to drag and drop or create cross connects to get
Right.
back into that service, and then have the APIs actually provision that service with the network as a service provider. But I do think long term the carriers are going to have to make some improvements to their infrastructure, modernize it a bit, and really leverage more of an automated network architecture to support it. So the whole software defined nature and applying that to their actual network, the connectivity they provide, and not building these, like these handmade snowflakes that a lot of service providers have done up
Right.
till now. Which I know,
Right.
coming from the world I came from, our network was largely configured and managed by hand by
Hmm.
CLI. I
Yeah.
know that
Absolutely. Yeah.
nowadays it's probably getting to be more automated, and
Hmm.
the OSS BSS systems are tying right in
Right.
to that infrastructure to program things. But I think this type of model might be even a little more dynamic than some of those traditional systems can handle. So I think it'll take a little while to get there, but I think
Hmm.
you'll see a transition start to happen over time here.
Yeah, and there's a commercial sea change that has to happen as well, right? So that's one of the main points here. Isn't just the underlying technology, but are you willing to bill customers on an hourly versus monthly or annual kind of contractual basis? I think that cultural change might just be part of it, beyond the technological changes, right? So
Definitely. And I'd heard, actually, this takes me back to, I don't know if you remember Time Warner Telecom, but they had
mhm.
this interesting product back in the day that where you could, kind of like you talked about, you could turn up and down the bandwidth that you had on the WAN at certain
Right, right,
locations, with their portal. But they had the concept of a megabit hour, like kind of a kilowatt
yeah,
hour, but
yeah,
but they had, like, you could actually bill by any usage, in a usage way, across the WAN. And I could see something like that, adopt. They would have to adopt to that, and figure out how to actually manage and bill for that. I don't know if it's,
hmm
I've dealt with burstable situations where it's like based on a 95th percentile,
right,
burstable billing. But yeah, you're right. The back end systems are going to have to be able to adapt and manage and work with that and accommodate things like billing by the megabit hour.
Right, right. Yeah, it's all one thing to have, OSS, BSS set up, but then just your sales teams have to think of this stuff in an entirely different kind of way than if you're used to, say, particularly the large carriers who are working with, very large multinational Fortune 1000 types that are accustomed to setting up a WAN contract for 3 to 5 years. A big difference to do the kinds of things that we've heard about the megaports and the packet fabrics of the world doing within the confines of an engagement like that. When you might have from your ILEC a dozen team members that work for them sitting in your offices, or I guess that doesn't happen much anymore, but being a part of the IT infrastructure team and all those kinds of things. I think that whole world doesn't seem super well adapted to this kind of model, and I think we'll probably have to make some changes there just culturally. So yeah, we'll see.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, using subscription and consumption based models is quite, quite a thing to have to adapt to. So I mean, as those things come up, especially for the cloud providers, so the network as a service providers that are building their infrastructure on cloud, I mean, they kind of don't have a choice. They're actually consuming it on a subscription model or on a usage based model, so that they're going to have to pass that along to their customers. And
well, that prepares the enterprise too, right? Because they've now become used to consuming compute and software on this model, and so the IT team is ready for that for network, perhaps. So
yeah, it's definitely, there might be some shockers of bills once they get dip their toe in and get started. But I think a lot of these guys have a kind of try before you buy model, so you can get in, try it out, and then once the rubber hits the road, you actually start to put real traffic on it. Then
but no, I mean, but you highlighted, I think, a very real concern we've heard from the end user side is, of course, I don't want to present to my bosses like a wildly unexpected bill. That's what's nice about the 3 to 5 year contract. We send that to the CFO for approval and it's done, right? You know what I mean? But I think, that'll be on sort of the NaaS providers to, do, just like you say, kind of give it a try, understand what impact different, sort of traffic happenings, exigencies, as they would put it in the contract, might impact you in that sense, right? So I think it's just a matter of knowing what's going on ahead of time. Certainly, yeah,
sure,
yeah. So I want to talk about SD-WAN a little bit next. From my perspective, NaaS is definitely, for the most part, a kind of middle mile solution, right? I did little air quotes there for our audio listeners here, so that right? Just so you know. But I think clearly it impacts the edge decisions that you're making. Obviously, specifically SD-WAN and also SASE. How do you see sort of the integration of some of these NaaS tools with the changes we're making in SD-WAN and SASE at the edge?
I think it's going to give organizations more geographic flexibility for integrating SD-WAN and SASE. So, if you've got a global network and you're trying to figure out how to tie in, the SD-WAN regions, being able to integrate those and on ramp them into the cloud network, or to provide, the secure access that you need. So if you say want to have an internet gateway locally, regionally, you could, with some of these solutions, potentially deploy your own, put your own virtual firewall right into that NaaS infrastructure, attach all of your, bring in and backhaul of your SD-WAN traffic from that region and have it flow through that firewall gateway. Also, the capabilities for remote access users. So I think you're going to see an evolution of SD-WAN to go outside of just the branch conversation and to the branch of one, as they say. So remote users being able to leverage SD-WAN for improving performance, but then being able to kind of craft things in a way that fits your use case, your organization. If you've got a large network and you need to manage it, Up till now, you've had to kind of depend on the vendor that you've gone with to support that and build that out for you.
Hmm.
But now you'll be able to kind of compose your own, choose your SD-WAN provider, choose your security provider, your remote
Hmm.
access, stitch these
Hmm.
things together, in a cloud instance somewhere, and then also tie in your cloud connectivity, your data center connectivity. If you've got headquarters that you need to get back to, just bring all that place and be able to create those hubs on your own.
Hmm.
So I think that's the key is not having to depend on an SD-WAN or SASE provider to facilitate those gateways for you. You'll be able to compose and tie them in yourself.
Hmm. And I suppose that's part of where someone like WAN Dynamics comes in as well, right? Is sort of helping, not as the term of art, but helping orchestrate all of that in a general sense, right? So
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
You got it. Yeah. We help them plan out, okay, here's where your locations are based. Here's where we think, as a central point, we should be backhauling your traffic to, and it should be egressing that private network to get to the internet. And then, vice versa, the traffic coming back, remote users, et cetera, helping
Hmm.
plan that. Yeah. That's a lot of what we do.
Yeah, so kind of following right up on that, maybe you could sort of take me through a little bit more about one of those integrations with a customer, like sort of, especially let's say someone's approaching you and they're like, okay, I know I need to leave behind my mostly MPLS environment. I'm still maybe breaking out my internet traffic centrally. I don't want to do that anymore for obvious reasons. How do you approach kind of working through one of those transformations with that whole integration in mind of from the SD-WAN to the various nasty kind of services available out there. What does that process look like for a typical customer, maybe?
First, it's establishing an inventory of the network, how it's laid out today, the
Mm-hmm.
service contracts they have with which providers, what types of services they're buying from a connectivity standpoint, figuring out the applications they're running. So identifying each of those apps, where those apps live, whether or not, this is an important one too. Just because those apps are there today doesn't mean they will be tomorrow. There's
Right.
so many IT teams that already have a cloud migration plan in
Mm-hmm.
flight. So don't assume that just because things are here today that they don't have plans to move it elsewhere. And
Right.
some of that might be outside their control. It could be, a software vendor that says, nope, we're not doing on-prem anymore. You got to
Mm-hmm.
buy our as a service offering. That's the only option for, renewing the service contract with, or the software
Yeah,
contract with us.
they don't want to ship you little 12-digit ID numbers to type in anywhere,
That's
or
right.
optical drives or something like that. Right? Yeah,
And they want that
yeah,
recurring, that
right.
nice recurring
Yeah,
business model. Yeah,
yes.
right. Recurring revenue is king.
As
So
a service is a good business to be in, definitely. So yeah,
that's
yeah.
right. Yeah. So, identifying those things, making sure that we're kind of building a 3 to 5 year plan for where, not only where applications are now, but where they're going to be.
Hmm.
And then, also, where are the users at? Are you
Right.
mostly remote now, post COVID? Are they coming back to the office? What is the strategy for how users are going to connect to the, all of your applications and services on the network, and then taking those factors and building a comprehensive plan. And
Yeah.
then, there's some customers we found, hey, you know what? MPLS is a perfectly good fit. They're a small
Right.
regional company. They're a bunch of call centers that are tied in a tight region,
Hmm.
and the model that they're using still works for them. I mean,
Right.
that's an outside use case, and kind of rare to find that, but
Hmm.
there is still call for MPLS in the underlay, especially for applications like when someone's got a lot of voice traffic.
Right.
We still
Yeah.
recommend
Yeah.
that.
For sure. That class of service becomes important. Plus,
Exactly.
you mentioned most of your customers tend to be kind of domestic U.S. or if you're in only in the U.S. and Canada, say the MPLS sort of story is pretty different than if you're dealing with the variability of MPLS pricing, across like 50 countries or something like that. Certainly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And also having to stitch those together somehow, I mean, the
Yeah.
capabilities
Yeah.
become so much easier with NaaS solutions because you can have a
A
centralized
regional
hub to
network or yeah.
aggregate that connectivity in a region and then be able to, build out transport. So that's, all part of that conversation. But yeah, those are the steps we typically take with a customer. Let's do an inventory of what you got. What are your applications today? What are they going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And how do your users connect to those applications? And then we craft something for them based on those items.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose especially bring in what we talked about last time, which has developed a lot since I think we talked about it, but the SASE component too of sort of for those who aren't maybe sticking with the MPLS kind of solution, right? That their security posture is probably going to change a lot, and that has to be involved in this decision making process as well, right? So
Yeah, they evaluate if zero trust is an option. It's always an option. It's always a recommendation to
right.
adopt zero trust models. Whether or not they actually can depends on the organization and the uh, whether they have the maturity with their users to be able to adopt a model like that, but because it can be sometimes disruptive to the workforce, but I'll always make recommendations to look at zero trust.
Yeah, well, especially you mentioned with remote workers, and I mean, well, first of all, that decision's probably really hard for a lot of IT infrastructure teams because they're not a part of that decision necessarily, and so figuring out, trying to read the tea leaves on what happens there and which branch offices are going to stay open, and that's not going to match necessarily the transport sort of contracts that you have in place perfectly and all that. I imagine it's ever more complicated, and then having to push a new security policy out to a bunch of people not in offices, I imagine is going to be a little bit of a nightmare for some folks as well. So
Yeah, it is challenging. I'm seeing a lot of new solutions that are tackling that. Obviously, with how COVID has changed things, there are a lot of there's a lot of product development happening inside of network vendors to solve those problems
yeah.
in a more creative way. Like I said, I see SD-WAN getting integrated with the entire WAN, the whole WAN,
Right.
including remote users. I see a lot more security integrations and pushing the security to the edge as far as possible, as close to the user as possible. And I really see, a wholesale change of how the WAN network is going to operate long term. NaaS being a part of it, and I really see that being a fundamental piece of how to aggregate that connectivity for those users, whether they're remote, a branch of one, or if they're a branch office. I still see a lot of organizations figuring that out, though. I mean, between the actual leases they have on office space and whether or not they're going to renew those leases, and a lot of pushback has come too when they say, okay, COVID's letting up, it's time to come back to the office, and some of those workers are saying no. I've gotten used to this. I want to stick with it. So even though that
I got 2 hours of my day back, and I'm not going to give that up again.
I'm
Right?
not giving that up again, and you got the great resignation happening, where
Right.
a lot of people are realizing the power they have collectively to go out and find a new gig. So that's changing even the plans that some of our customers have told us, like, oh, this is the plan, we're going back to the office, and then they'll a couple 2-3 months later, wait a minute, maybe not, because it didn't fly too well. So there's a lot of variability. There's a lot of different ideas out there. But I think the one key thing to keep in mind, and what makes NaaS so important, is that you can change things on the fly. So when your plan changes, you have a flexible infrastructure that just kind of rolls with those changes.
Hmm. Yeah, so very much on that note, I thought the way I wanted to kind of wrap up is to explore that a little bit deeper, looking forward now. Is that with all of these things, I think there's going to be persistent remote work. So branch offices of one, right? All the SD WAN, all the big SD WAN players have responded to that with software and whatnot that can be pushed out to all of those folks. Uh, the branch offices and official sites that still do exist are moving to internet, sometimes very much just even sourced from like local ISPs and stuff like that. And then getting onto the cloud becomes this sort of SDN powered kind of on demand thing, again, through in many cases like over the top kind of stuff. Or is the WAN disappearing? When I sort of, we have interns every summer, and we get new hires, and I do my little like, this is what a WAN is session. It's always so straightforward. You start out with, okay, well, you know what a LAN is. Maybe you have gamer friends who had a LAN party, and this is that's kind of disappearing in a way, right? For something that sits on top of a physical layer that is just dumb pipes in a way, right? So it's what in many ways the carriers have feared for a long time. Do you think that is coming to fruition? And if so, what does that kind of mean for the IT infrastructure team on the end user side?
I don't think the private WAN is going to disappear altogether. I
Mm-hmm.
do think that it will be still required for some of those outside use cases, like we talked about,
Right.
call centers, somebody who has requirements as far as performance goes. But in how applications are shifting, and they are a little bit more adapted to internet connectivity. I do see a lot of applications moving to internet based
Mm-hmm.
connectivity versus the
Mm-hmm.
private WAN. That said, I do think that there's still be dynamic private overlays that you can build over top of that. So
Right.
so in the terms of a private dedicated WAN, maybe not, but a private WAN that presents itself, in an overlay over top of
So a
internet
virtual
connectivity.
private WAN, if you will, right? So, yeah,
Exactly, a
yeah,
virtual
yeah.
private WAN. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the way things are going to move forward. And I think that this software defined world, the software defined network infrastructure, what it's fundamentally going to change is the way that organizations procure and consume connectivity between
Mm-hmm.
users, their offices, data center and cloud. It's not so you're not going to be calling up your telco sales guy to say send that contract over. I'm going to sign it, wait for that to get processed. I'll wait a
Right.
firm order commitment date, slogging through the provisioning process and waiting 3 to 4 months to get something
Mm-hmm.
turned up.
Mm-hmm.
I see a day where a customer will go into a portal.
Okay.
They'll request a type of service right through that portal. It'll be on demand, and they'll have the option to pick. Okay, this is the level of SLA I'm looking for. This is the
Mm-hmm.
timing I require, and these are the performance requirements of what I'm looking at. And then they'll kind of pick and choose based on that criteria. Through that portal. Okay, here's the type of service that we
Mm-hmm.
think you'll need based on the criteria you're setting.
Right.
So, for IT infrastructure teams, that means, faster deployments, more flexibility, greater visibility into, the world of connectivity that they manage.
Mm-hmm.
And, it really gives them, and I'll bring it back around to talking about how IT teams manage public cloud. It'll look more like that. They'll have a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
marketplace to select network services that they're looking for, be able to compose that in a way that works for their organization, both geographically and from a technical engineering perspective, what works the best from a latency perspective.
Right.
Obviously, lowering the latency that as low as you can on all of these services and tying them all together, being able to kind of stitch that together and make the choices to do that, in an agile, self-service environment. I think that's where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Now, of course, my caveat to that sort of future world is always that, yeah, certainly cloud services go down sometimes, but it's some things happened maybe physically at a data center. That's really rare. Maybe some routing tables got messed up. People dig and break access loops all the time, right? So there's always going to be a world where you're going to have to open a trouble ticket with somebody, and sort of knowing who that is. Ultimately, there's still going to be some amount of kind of boots on the ground involved certainly at the edge kind of level. But
Yeah, that's never going to go
yeah,
away. I mean, that's
yeah.
all. We're always going to have that. I think that the demands of making that, go faster, um, to be able to provision those services more quickly, and the impact of 5G low Earth orbit
Hmm.
satellite.
Yeah,
I think those
yeah.
things are going to impact how quickly we're able to turn up services and get things activated moving forward. But
Yeah, big time. I mean,
yeah.
that both of those things could be seriously disruptive to even what I just mentioned. Right? Is that like if you can get access to a combination of 5G and LEO, say, then there is no more digging, right? So that's that both from a provisioning standpoint and from an outages standpoint. That may kind of disappear eventually. We'll see how that works out. Or something we're watching, I can tell you that certainly keenly. So
I
yeah.
think based on my experiences I have Starlink here at home.
Hmm.
It's secondary to I have a cable service, and
Right.
I'm just really curious about it. And I had a 4G backup, and I'm figure, yeah, let's give Starlink
Yeah. Yeah.
a shot. I will tell you, based on my experience with Starlink so far, they don't really have much to worry about for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
sure.
definitely
Yeah.
has its issues, it
It's,
has its challenges today. Can't speak
mhm.
much to 5G. I haven't really used it. It's not, that's I think the biggest challenge with 5G is
Yeah.
density right now. You
Yeah,
can't
there's not a
really
lot of
do
fixed
coverage.
5G subscriptions available out there. It's still mobile technology for the most part, right? So, like, but it's probably coming. You're right. The tower density has to increase greatly and then they need to come up with fixed plans and all. This is a whole. We could do a whole podcast just on alternative. But there's also beyond Starlink and Kuiper, there's other startups that have sort of like plans to be live in like 2028 and stuff, right? So kind of depends on funding happens for all of those, how that all works out. But there's a potential for a very different world. We'll see if it comes to fruition or not, I think so.
Yeah, but to bring it back to your point on the private WAN,
Hmm.
'cause I don't think it's
Yeah.
it's not going to go away that quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a number of customers that are are of the mind, my MPLS from my cold dead hands. Like they're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
they're not getting off it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're still feel
I've seen
comfortable with
those.
using it,
Hmm.
and it still suits the applications that they have.
Right.
There's still application for it for sure.
Yeah, and there's some like industries where that's going to make sense for a lot longer, that have different security or even like reporting kind of concerns, like maybe in the healthcare industry we've seen a few folks indicate that, like, oh, I have no, or other conservative verticals, like finance or whatever, that aren't going to jump into the wilds of the internet, even with all the sort of over the top assurances that will be slower. And for that matter, there might be some applications that just never let go. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing, but I've seen a lot of end users who are still have some on-prem data centers and have no intention of turning them down at this point for various reasons. So even if it's a part of a big sort of multi-cloud strategy. So for an on-prem data center, certainly MPLS still makes a lot of sense, or at least private lines in some cases, right? So yeah.
I hate to say it, it's usually because there's a mainframe in it, but
I
at least
was
from my
gonna say, it's
experience.
like, yeah, there's like one guy who knows how it works. It's just, yeah,
Don't touch it. Don't get rid
yeah,
of the MPLS. Leave the mainframe alone.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, Jason, this was super fun. Thank you so much. Before we go, though, I want to make sure folks know how to reach you. Where can anybody find you?
Good. Probably best place, LinkedIn. Just look for
Yeah,
Jason Gintert, Gintert, and then I'm also on Twitter. I'm at Bits and Flight.
nice.
Also
All right.
bitsandflight.com. That's my personal blog. So
Mhm.
those are all good places to catch up with me.
And in person, I know unfortunately you can't make it to the New York WAN Summit, but any events coming up for you where folks might be able to meet up with you?
I mean, I will be attending Networking Field Day 28 coming up, so I would
Okay.
encourage folks to tune into that. That's May 2nd through 4th. If this comes out before then, I guess it might not. But at any
I
rate,
think this should be out. Well, let's see, May 2nd. That's a Monday, isn't it? Yeah, this probably. Yeah, maybe not, but, but maybe they saw you there. Yeah, so,
yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Other events coming up. I'm still ramping up on events right now, so I'm really bummed to miss the WAN summit. The
Yeah,
timing
I
just
know.
didn't
That's
line up for me.
that's the way it goes. But hopefully this is the last year of weirdness, and things get back to their normal schedule. It's also occurring at the exact same time as the IT Expo, which is something that I would have gone to if I weren't going to the WAN Summit in New York. So I think everything will start to get put across the calendar in the more even distributions like they were pre March 2020 eventually here. But it's kind of the wilds right now, figuring out how to get everything going, ramped up again. So
Definitely, I've seen
baby
the same.
steps. Yeah,
Right. Very
excellent. Well,
cool.
thanks so much. It was great talking to you again.
You too, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. The WAN Manager podcast comes from the team at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. I also wrote the theme song that you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com. Or if you want to get right into more WAN content like you hear on the show, you can visit Telegeography's WAN forum at wanforum.com. We've got all of our podcast episodes over there, WAN Manager survey data, and extra analysis pieces. That's all for now. So until next time, WAN enthusiasts.